What happens when the woman who has everything meets the man who has lost it all? Angeline Hawthorne, a CEO who commands boardrooms with icy precision, is about to discover that the greatest assets aren't traded on the stock market. On a snowy New York night, a chance encounter with a little girl sleeping at a bus stop will unravel a world she never knew existed, a world of quiet strength, unwavering love, and a past she can't ignore. She came to offer help, but she would soon find out that she was the one who truly needed to be saved. This is a story about how a simple act of kindness can change a destiny. If you believe that love can be found in the most unexpected places and that everyone deserves a second chance, then this story is for you. Make sure to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and comment below with what you think will happen next. You won't want to miss a single moment. Snow fell over New York City, not in a flurry, but in a quiet, deliberate descent, blanketing the unforgiving lines of skyscrapers in a layer of impossible softness. It was the kind of night that silenced the city's relentless hum, leaving only the whisper of the wind weaving through concrete canyons. From a glass tower on Park Avenue, Angeline Hawthorne emerged. At 34, she was the architect of a financial empire, a woman whose world was built on calculated risks and emotionless strategy. The weight of another brutal board meeting still clung to her shoulders like the expensive wool of her coat. Her driver waited by the curb, the warm glow of the limousine a familiar promise of isolation and comfort. But tonight, something in her resisted. Waving him off, she stepped onto the sidewalk, letting the biting cold sting her cheeks, hoping it might clear the static from her mind. She walked without direction, her polished heels making crisp sounds on the fresh snow. It was on a forgotten side street, under the flickering lonely light of an old bus stop, that she saw it, a small shape, curled on the frozen metal of the bench. She slowed, her breath catching in her throat, a plume of white in the frigid air. It was a child. A little girl, no older than 6, huddled under a worn-out man's jacket, her small frame lost in its size. Strands of dark hair escaped her knitted cap, dusted with snowflakes. Her cheeks were flushed raw by the wind, her lips tinged with a faint blue that spoke of a deep, penetrating cold. She was asleep, or trying to be, in a world that should have kept her safe and warm. A surge of something fierce and unfamiliar, alarm maybe, or a long-dormant instinct, shot through Angeline. Without a second thought, she closed the distance and knelt, her designer coat brushing against the snow-dusted pavement. The silence here was profound, broken only by the city's distant, muffled heartbeat. This small, sleeping child was an anomaly, a fragile piece of humanity left behind in the relentless march of the metropolis, and in that moment, Angeline knew she could not just walk away. Angeline hesitated for a heartbeat, a rare moment of uncertainty for a woman who made billion-dollar decisions before breakfast. Her world was one of leverage and calculated outcomes, but here, kneeling in the snow, there were no familiar rules. How do you approach a dream without shattering it? She reached out a hand, her fine leather glove a stark contrast to the worn fabric of the child's jacket, and gently touched her shoulder. "Hey," she said, her voice softer than she intended, almost a whisper. "Hey, wake up. It's too cold to sleep out here." The little girl stirred, a small sigh escaping her lips before her eyes fluttered open. Angeline braced herself for tears, for fear, for the panicked cry of a child waking up to a stranger. Instead, she was met with a gaze of startling clarity. The girl's eyes were a deep, thoughtful brown, and in them, there was no trace of alarm. Only a quiet, unwavering calm. She sat up, the oversized jacket pooling around her, and looked at Angeline not as a threat, but as an expectation fulfilled. "You came," the little girl said, her voice small but clear, not shivering as much as Angeline had expected. She then offered a simple, trusting smile. Angeline, the woman who could dismantle a hostile takeover with a single phone call, was rendered utterly speechless. Before she could formulate a response, the child spoke again, her words landing with a force that cracked the icy armor around Angeline's heart. "My dad said a guardian angel would come if I got too cold. Is that you?" The question was so pure, so devoid of guile, that it struck Angeline with the force of a physical blow. Guardian angel. The phrase was from a language she didn't speak, a currency she didn't trade in. Her life was a fortress built of logic, proof, and tangible results. Yet this small child, with nothing to her name but a threadbare jacket and an unshakable faith, had just breached its walls with 2 simple words. Angeline could only stare, the cold air she was breathing in feeling suddenly sharp and real. For the first time in years, she felt something other than control or ambition. She felt profoundly lost. For a long moment, Angeline remained frozen, the child's innocent question echoing in the silent, snowy air. A dozen logical actions scrolled through her mind: call the police, find the nearest shelter, delegate the problem to someone, anyone, else. That was the Hawthorne way: identify a problem, find the most efficient solution, and move on. But her body refused to obey the cold calculus of her brain. Looking at the small, trusting face before her, she saw not a problem to be solved, but a truth she couldn't ignore. In a world that had demanded she be hard, strategic, and untouchable, this child was offering a moment of genuine, unvarnished humanity. And Angeline found she was starving for it. Her mind finally went quiet, and for the first time that night, her heart took over. Slowly, deliberately, she began to unbutton her coat. It was a custom-made cashmere piece, a dark gray armor that cost more than most people's cars, imbued with the faint, expensive scent of her perfume. As she slipped it from her shoulders, the frigid air immediately bit through the silk of her blouse, a sharp, unwelcome shock. But she ignored it. With a tenderness that felt foreign even to herself, she wrapped the heavy, luxurious coat around the little girl's small frame. Lily gasped softly as the warmth enveloped her, sinking into the plush lining as if it were a cloud. The coat swallowed her whole, the sleeves dangling far past her hands, but she looked up at Angeline with wide, grateful eyes. "What's your name?" Angeline asked, her voice steady now. "Lily," the girl whispered, nestling deeper into the warmth. "My dad's Leo. He's coming back soon. He promised." A promise. Another concept from a world Angeline had left behind. Angeline sat down on the cold metal bench beside her, the distance between them now occupied by a shared purpose. There they were, the titan of industry in her $1,000 suit, shivering slightly in the falling snow, and the little girl, cocooned in a warmth she had likely never known. They didn't speak much after that. There was nothing to say. Around them, the city slept under its white blanket, oblivious to the small, silent vigil taking place at a forgotten bus stop. Angeline wasn't saving a child anymore, she was simply waiting with one, and in that quiet, shared act, she felt a flicker of warmth that had nothing to do with cashmere and everything to do with connection. Lanjit. Leo moved through the snow-swept streets like a phantom, his shoulders hunched against a wind that felt personal in its assault. In his hand, he clutched a small grease-stained paper bag containing two precious commodities, a warm cup of soup and a bread roll from the church kitchen downtown. It wasn't much, but tonight, it was everything. Every step was fueled by a singular burning thought: Lily. He had been gone longer than he'd wanted, the line for food snaking around the block, each minute away from her feeling like a small eternity. He had left her in the relative shelter of the bus stop, a place he'd chosen for its single steady light, a small beacon against the vast indifference of the city. He'd told her to be brave, to think of it as a waiting game, and to trust that he would always, always come back. As he turned the final corner, his heart hammered against his ribs in a familiar rhythm of hope and fear. He saw the light of the bus stop up ahead, a hazy yellow glow in the swirling snow. And then he saw them. His blood ran cold. Lily was not alone. She was sitting upright, swaddled in a dark, impossibly luxurious coat, and beside her sat a woman. She was tall, poised, her silhouette sharp and elegant against the backdrop of the storm. She looked like she had stepped out of a magazine, a creature from a different world, the world of penthouses and private cars, the world that had chewed him up and spat him out. And she was with his daughter. Raw, primal panic seized him. He dropped the bag, the soup spilling onto the snow in a dark, steaming stain, and bolted forward. "Lily." The cry was torn from his throat, sharp with terror. In a matter of seconds he was there, scooping his daughter from the bench and pulling her tight against his chest, shielding her with his own body. He turned on Angeline, his eyes blazing with a fierce, protective fire. "Get away from her," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. He didn't see a potential benefactor or a concerned citizen. He saw a threat, an unknown variable in the fragile equation of their survival. Angeline shot to her feet, startled by the sudden, violent intrusion. Her hands went up instinctively in a gesture of peace, but Leo didn't see it. He only saw a predator near his child, and in that moment, he was ready to fight the entire world to keep her safe. Faced with the raw fury of a protective father, Angeline's instinct for control took over. She held her ground, her posture calm, her hands still raised in a gesture of surrender. She met his fiery gaze not with defiance, but with a quiet, steady resolve. "I'm not going to hurt her," she said, her voice even and clear, cutting through the hiss of the wind. I found her sleeping here. She was freezing. I was just sitting with her until you came back. Leo's grip on Lily didn't loosen. His mind, conditioned by years of hardship and broken promises, searched for the angle, the hidden cost. People from her world didn't do things for free. Kindness, he had learned, was just a transaction in disguise. People like you don't just sit with people like us, he countered, his voice rough with exhaustion and distrust. What do you want? The standoff hung in the frigid air, thick and heavy. It was a small, muffled voice that finally broke the spell. It's okay, Dad. Lily, her face peeking out from the fortress of her father's arms, looked not at him, but at Angeline. She's nice. She's my guardian angel. She then wriggled a small hand out from the coat's cavernous sleeve and pointed. She gave me her coat. It's warm. Leo's gaze followed his daughter's gesture. For the first time, he truly saw the garment enveloping her. It was a coat of impossible quality, a shield of dark wool that radiated a warmth he could only dream of providing. His eyes then shifted from the coat to Lily's face. She wasn't scared. She was calm, safe. And then he looked at Angeline, really looked at her, past the expensive clothes and the air of authority. He saw no malice in her eyes, only a quiet, weary concern that mirrored his own. The fire in his chest didn't vanish, but it dwindled to embers. The adrenaline receded, leaving behind the bone-deep ache of his long day and the crushing weight of his reality. He saw the dark stain of the spilled soup on the snow, his one small victory for the night lost. He looked at his daughter, safe and warm in a stranger's charity, and the wall of his anger began to crumble, revealing the terrified, exhausted man behind it. He didn't offer an apology, but the tension in his shoulders eased, a silent admission that his fear might have been misplaced. The immediate danger had passed, leaving 3 strangers in the snow, bound by a coat and a child's unwavering faith. The silence that fell between them was heavy, punctuated only by the soft whisper of falling snow. The immediate crisis had passed, but the larger, colder reality of their situation remained. Angeline looked from Leo's weary, guarded face to the small child still held tightly in his arms. Her coat, a temporary shield against the elements, was not a solution. It was a bandage on a wound that ran far deeper. Her practical mind, the one that built empires, took over, now guided by a new, unfamiliar current of empathy. She knew what had to happen next. Look, she began, her tone carefully neutral, stripped of pity or condescension. It's getting colder. It's not safe for her to be out here. There's a modest, clean motel 3 blocks from here. Let me get you a room. Just for the night. Leo's back stiffened instantly, the wall of his pride rebuilding itself brick by brick. For a man who had lost everything, pride was the one currency he had left. Accepting this offer felt like the final act of surrender. We don't take charity, he said, the words clipped and final. It was a reflexive defense, the same one he'd used 100 times to keep the last vestiges of his dignity intact. Angeline saw the fierce independence in his eyes, and for the first time, she truly understood it. She wasn't dealing with a beggar, she was dealing with a father fighting a losing war. She needed a different strategy, one that wasn't about power, but about partnership. This isn't charity, she said softly, holding his gaze. And it isn't about you. It's about her. She nodded toward Lily, who had begun to look pale and drowsy in the shelter of her father's arms. She needs a warm bed. She needs to be out of this wind. Angeline took a small step back, giving him space. I'll handle it anonymously at the front desk. They won't know who paid. You check in, you get some rest, and in the morning, you can walk away. You'll never have to see me again. Just, let her be safe tonight. Her words hung in the air, a lifeline offered without strings. Leo looked down at his daughter. He could feel the slight tremor of a shiver beginning to run through her small body, even through the thick coat. In that moment, the battle was over. His pride was a worthy shield, but it was no match for the ferocious, unconditional love he had for his child. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Okay, he breathed out, the word a cloud of white in the cold night air. Just for tonight. The walk to the motel was a silent procession, 3 solitary figures moving through a city that had been muted by the snow. Leo walked with a stiff, guarded posture, holding Lily securely against his chest. Angeline kept a respectful distance, the space between them filled with unspoken words and the quiet crunch of their footsteps. She was acutely aware of the chasm that separated their worlds, a gap that seemed even wider under the dim glow of the streetlights. At the motel, a small unassuming place with a faded neon sign, Angeline handled the transaction with the quiet efficiency that defined her. She spoke in low tones to the drowsy night clerk, paid in cash to leave no paper trail, and secured a key. She had made a promise, anonymity, no strings attached, and in her world, a promise was a contract. She turned and handed the plastic key card to Leo. Their fingers brushed for a fleeting second, a brief spark of contact in the cold air. Room 207. It's on the second floor, she said, her voice purely informational. Thank you, he murmured, the words so quiet they were nearly lost to the wind. He wouldn't meet her eyes, his gaze fixed somewhere on the worn carpet of the lobby. This was the end of their arrangement. Angeline gave a small formal nod and turned to leave, ready to step back into her world of sterile penthouses and predictable outcomes, leaving this strange, heart-wrenching encounter behind her like a dream. She had done her part. The contract was fulfilled. But then, she felt a small hesitant tug on the sleeve of her silk blouse. She stopped and looked down. Lily had slipped down from her father's arms and now stood beside her, looking up with those same wide, serious eyes from the bus stop. You're leaving? The little girl asked. Angeline knelt to meet her gaze. I have to. But you'll be warm in here with your dad. Lily's expression didn't change. But will you come back tomorrow? She pressed, her voice a hopeful whisper. My dad says promises are important. The simple, profound question struck Angeline with unexpected force. She glanced up at Leo, whose face was a mask of conflicting emotions. She had promised him an exit, a clean break. But this child, with her simple faith, was asking for a new promise entirely. Angeline looked back at Lily, at the unwavering hope in her eyes, and a word she hadn't planned to say slipped from her lips. I'll try, she said softly. I'll try. As she walked out the door and back into the swirling snow, she knew that a simple one-night transaction had just become something far more complicated. Angeline returned to her penthouse, a silent sanctuary of glass and steel suspended 40 stories above the sleeping city. The panoramic view of the snow-covered skyline, a sight that usually filled her with a sense of power and ownership, now felt distant and cold. The minimalist furniture, the curated art, the suffocating silence, it all seemed to amplify the profound emptiness of the space. She stood by the window for a long time, the warmth of the heated floors a stark contrast to the phantom chill she still felt from the bus stop bench. The memory of the night was a vivid, unwelcome guest in the sterile order of her life. She couldn't shake the image of Lily's trusting eyes or the memory of Leo's gaze, a fractured mix of fierce pride and deep, abiding weariness. They were not a statistic or a headline about the city's homeless. They were real, and their reality had breached the walls of her carefully constructed world. Sleep was impossible. The next morning, she sat at her desk, staring blankly at market projections while her mind was 3 blocks away, in a cheap motel room. The uncertainty was an irritant, an unresolved variable in an equation she needed to solve. Angeline Hawthorne did not do well with unknowns. She picked up her phone and called her executive assistant, a woman of formidable efficiency and absolute discretion. Clara, she said, her voice betraying none of her inner turmoil. I have a delicate task for you. I need you to find information on a man and his daughter. The father's name is Leo, the daughter is Lily. No last name. They are currently displaced. He may have a background as a chef or in the restaurant industry. I need to know his story. And Clara, she added, her voice dropping slightly, this is to be handled with the utmost discretion. They are not to know they are being looked for. There was no judgment on the other end of the line, only a quiet, of course, Ms. Hawthorne. By afternoon, a simple encrypted file appeared in her inbox. Angeline opened it. The story it told was one of quiet ambition and devastating luck. Leo Rossi, former owner and head chef of the Little Mulberry, a small critically acclaimed bistro in Brooklyn. The file contained glowing reviews of his cooking, photos of a warm, inviting restaurant, and the story of a man who had poured his soul into his craft. Then came the downturn, a brutal economic crisis followed by a personal tragedy, the sudden loss of his wife to illness, that had crippled him emotionally and financially. One by one, the lights of his life had gone out, leaving him with only his daughter and the streets. No criminal record. No history of addiction. Just a good man, a talented chef, and a loving father who had been hit by a storm he couldn't weather. Angeline closed the file, the sterile facts painting a devastatingly human picture. This was no longer a chance encounter. Now, it was personal. The information in the file changed everything. Angeline was no longer driven by a fleeting sense of pity, but by a burgeoning, undeniable respect. A simple check from the Hawthorne Foundation could give Leo a roof over his head, but it would be an insult to the man she was beginning to understand. Leo Rossi wasn't a man who needed a handout, he was a man who needed a kitchen. The file had mentioned a community center in the Lower East Side where he and Lily occasionally took shelter. Following an instinct she didn't fully understand, Angeline found herself there the next evening, stepping out of her sleek black car into a world of graffiti-lined streets and the distant wail of sirens. She stood just inside the doorway of the center's bustling kitchen, a ghost from another reality in her tailored suit. The air was thick with the scent of simmering stew and the clamor of clanging pots and hurried conversations. It was organized chaos, a world away from the hushed reverence of the Michelin-starred restaurants she frequented. And then she saw him. He was standing over a massive stainless steel counter, a worn apron tied around his waist. He wasn't in the line waiting for food, he was at the heart of the operation working. Angeline watched, unseen, as he moved with a fluid, focused grace that was utterly captivating. His hands, though rough and calloused, moved with the precision of an artist. He chopped a mountain of onions with a rhythmic, hypnotic speed, his form perfect. He tasted the soup from a giant cauldron not with the desperation of a hungry man, but with the critical focus of a chef, adding a pinch of salt here, a stir there. But it was more than his skill that held her transfixed. It was the dignity he radiated. He wasn't just going through the motions, he was present, invested. He offered a quiet, encouraging word to the young volunteer beside him and plated each bowl of stew with a care that suggested it was a dish being served in his own bistro. In a corner, Lily sat at a small table with a coloring book, looking up every few minutes to watch her father, her expression one of absolute pride. Angeline had come expecting to see a broken man. Instead, she found a master craftsman, a leader, a father, who, even when stripped of everything, had refused to lose his purpose. As she slipped back out into the cold, a new, audacious plan was already beginning to form in her mind, a plan that wasn't about charity, but about resurrection. Angeline returned to the community kitchen the following evening, but this time, she didn't linger in the shadows. She had traded her tailored suit for simple black trousers and a warm, unassuming sweater. She found Leo packing leftover meals into containers, a task he undertook himself after his volunteer shift was over, destined for those who lived in the deepest recesses of the city's alleys. She approached him quietly, her presence causing him to look up, his expression immediately guarded. "What do you want?" he asked, his tone flat, a shield against whatever she was about to offer. Angeline met his gaze directly. "I want to help," she said simply. "With this. It looks like you have more food than you have hands." She picked up an empty container and held it, waiting. It was not an offer of money or a home, it was an offer of work, of shared purpose. Leo studied her for a long, silent moment, searching for the catch. But seeing only quiet sincerity in her eyes, he gave a curt nod and pushed a stack of containers toward her. That night marked the beginning of their ritual. After the kitchen closed and Lily was settled in a warm corner of the shelter with her book, they would pack the remaining food and walk together into the city's forgotten corners. On those long, cold walks, shielded by the anonymity of the darkness, the walls between them began to crumble. It started slowly. Leo spoke of food not as a means of survival, but as a language, the way the scent of garlic and rosemary could feel like a memory, how the perfect loaf of bread could be a small act of grace. He spoke of his bistro, his voice filled with a quiet passion that was both beautiful and heartbreaking. In turn, Angeline found herself sharing pieces of her own life she'd never voiced aloud. She spoke of the crushing loneliness of the boardroom, of days filled with numbers and strategy but devoid of human connection. She described feeling like a ghost in her own lavish penthouse, surrounded by everything and feeling nothing. In the shared darkness of the New York streets, they were no longer a CEO and a homeless chef. They were just Angeline and Leo, two people from different worlds who discovered they spoke the same language of loss and quiet longing. A fragile trust was being built, one steaming container of stew, one shared story at a time. And with that trust, something else was growing, a delicate unspoken warmth that had little to do with the cold night air. The nightly walks with Leo solidified Angeline's resolve into a sharp, undeniable purpose. Listening to him describe the perfect balance of flavors in a bouillabaisse or the simple profound joy of a perfectly baked loaf of bread, she saw not a man who needed saving, but a talent that was being criminally wasted. The world, she decided, deserved to taste Leo Rossi's cooking again. Back in the sterile quiet of her office, Angeline Hawthorne, the corporate strategist, went to work. She gave her assistant, Clara, a new highly confidential assignment to scout for a defunct restaurant space. The criteria were specific. It couldn't be a gleaming modern storefront in a soulless part of town. It needed character, history, good bones. A place that felt like it had a soul, waiting to be reawakened. Within a week, Clara found it, a former Italian bistro tucked away on a cobblestone street in the East Village. It had been closed for years, its windows dusty and its cheerful red awning faded by the sun. But behind the neglect, Angeline saw the potential. There was a solid brick oven, a layout that encouraged intimate conversation, and a tangible warmth that even years of vacancy couldn't extinguish. It was perfect. Moving with the silent, swift efficiency that had built her empire, Angeline acquired the property through her foundation, burying her own name under layers of corporate paperwork. While she spent her nights walking the cold streets with Leo, sharing stories under the dim city lights, she spent her days orchestrating a resurrection. She reviewed blueprints, not for a new skyscraper, but for the restoration of a kitchen. She chose warm, rustic wood for the tables and soft, ambient lighting. She wasn't just renovating a building, she was crafting a sanctuary. In her project files, she gave it a name, the Hearth. It was more than a restaurant, it was to be the heart of a new beginning, a source of warmth and nourishment for the community, and for the man who knew how to provide it better than anyone. As the final touches were being put on the space, the gleaming new copper pots hung in the kitchen, the simple elegant sign bearing its new name ready to be installed, Angeline stood across the street one evening, watching the warm light spill from its windows. She had built Leo's future in secret. Now came the hardest part, she had to tell him. The moment of truth arrived not with a grand gesture, but with a quiet, accidental slip. One evening, as they were cleaning up in the community kitchen, Angeline stepped away to take a call from her assistant. She spoke in low, hushed tones, but the pristine acoustics of the empty kitchen carried her words. Finalize the transfer from the Hawthorne Foundation to the Hearth's operating account, Clara. And make sure my name is nowhere on the public filings. Leo, walking over to offer her a cup of tea, froze mid-step. Hawthorne Foundation. The name struck him like a physical blow. He'd seen it on plaques in museums and hospitals. It belonged to Angeline Hawthorne, the ruthless, brilliant CEO of Hawthorne Industries, a titan of Wall Street whose face he now recalled from the cover of a business magazine. And she was the woman he had been sharing his deepest fears and fragile dreams with. When she ended the call and turned, she saw the look on his face and knew, instantly, that he had heard. The color drained from her cheeks. Leo. She started, but he cut her off, his voice dangerously quiet. The Hearth? Is that what this has been? Your new pet project? The hurt in his eyes was a blade twisting in her gut. All those nights, all those conversations. Were you just gathering data for your next charitable venture? Sizing up the poor broken man to see if he was a worthy investment. His pride, the one thing he had fought so hard to protect, was shattered. He felt like a fool, a pawn in a rich woman's game of benevolence. Tears welled in Angeline's eyes, the first she had shed in years. All her strategy, all her power, was useless now. All she had left was the raw, terrifying truth. No, she whispered, stepping closer. You were never a project. She took a shaky breath, laying her own heart bare. I did it because I saw a brilliant chef who deserved a kitchen. I kept it a secret because I didn't want you to see the CEO. I just wanted you to see me. But somewhere along the way, my reasons changed. It stopped being about your past and it started being about my future. She looked at him, her defenses gone. I did this, Leo, because I'm falling in love with you. Her confession hung in the air, disarming his anger with its simple, vulnerable honesty. He looked at her, truly saw her, not as the powerful CEO, but as the woman who had sat with his daughter in the snow, who had listened to his stories, who had seen the man he was, not the circumstances he was in. The anger in his eyes softened, replaced by a dawning understanding. Later that week, they stood together in front of the bistro, its windows glowing with a warm, inviting light. Lily danced between them, tracing the letters on the new wooden sign, the Hearth. It wasn't a gift from a billionaire or a charitable act. It was a foundation, built in secret, but now ready to be a home they would build together. As the first snowflakes of a new evening began to fall, they stood not as strangers from different worlds, but as a family, finally, at the heart of their new beginning.